Nearly 23 years after its release, and the legendary, iconic game returns with all the enhancements of a modern-day console, and backed by a AAA budget. Final Fantasy VII Remake finally makes its grand debut as a tie-in PlayStation exclusive. But can it hold up to its legacy, or will it forever live under the original shadow? I'm Gray, welcome to my channel, and this is my review of Final Fantasy VII Remake. Upon revealing a Final Fantasy VII tech demo for the PlayStation 3 way back in 2005, fans have been begging Square Enix for a full-on remake of the classic and much beloved Final Fantasy VII. While I personally wasn't hyped for the announcement of a remake, I do appreciate the effort Square Enix went through to get this done. Remaking a classic is hard, as expectations are sky high. Pleasing both newcomers and old-timers is a feat that rarely happens in video games when revisiting an old IP. Quick note that I played Final Fantasy VII a few years back, so I don't harbor any nostalgic feelings. And it's not my favorite Final Fantasy game, as 6 and 9 easily take the crown for me. As with most games, I go in blind without watching a trailer or reading any news articles about the game, which came as a surprise when I realized that the game is basically only the first third of Final Fantasy VII, containing only the Midgar section. So without further ado, let's start. Right off the bat, the graphics were absolutely stunning. Opening up the game for the first time and witnessing an extended take on the iconic Final Fantasy VII intro gave me goosebumps, as Final Fantasy VII was one of the first 3D games, and that intro is one of my favorite intros in gaming. At first, the graphics were great. I absolutely loved the atmosphere of the first Mako reactor. The quality of the facial animations was on point. It really felt like the characters were real actors acting out, especially Cloud's chuckle after being praised by Jesse in the opening, and the per object motion blur in the game was masterfully crafted, giving the perfect amount of emphasis to the character's action. The way Cloud's Buster Sword just swings, cutting through enemies, was a spectacle. The blending of CG cutscenes and gameplay was also a nice throwback, as the original PlayStation 1 games had that in spades. The way the camera just smoothly sweeps to the back of Cloud after a gorgeous cutscene is great. The general atmosphere was also brilliant, as it felt like I was there in the Mako reactor. The general frame rate and resolution of the game was stable, as I never noticed a hitch in resolution or frame rate, unlike the previous Final Fantasy 15, which was all over the place. It really felt like Final Fantasy VII one-upped its predecessor in that regard. HDR was phenomenally implemented. While it wasn't the best, it was still decent enough to warrant having it on, which unfortunately can be said about every AAA game out there today. Everything was perfect at the beginning. Shortly after the opening mission, when you reach Sector 7, the graphical quality just takes an absolute dive. The first jarring thing was how low quality the textures got. At first, I shrugged it off as being a bug or just the PlayStation 4 Pro being so slow to load textures. But as I progressed, I realized that these were the original textures and they look worse than PlayStation 2 quality. This is especially jarring when you put a high quality character in a low quality environment. The low resolution textures just stick out like a Thor's thumb. But unfortunately, it didn't stop there. Looking at the sky, I also noticed that the skybox is just a 2D image. This was especially apparent in areas of the game where you are on the upper plates of Midgar, and the ground is a low resolution texture. So basically you're looking down on a low resolution image of Midgar's slum, and it generally looked worse than the re-release of the original Final Fantasy VII. This also happened in a cutscene later on in the game where the gang looks over Midgar's horizon and it's just a low resolution pixelated image that genuinely made me cringe and just lifted me out of the immersion. This usually wouldn't be an issue if done right, especially since in the late game, this technique is used seamlessly, giving off the illusion of a crisp horizon. However, it feels like they rushed the game out in an unfinished state graphically, since the first area and the last area of the game were so much better looking than the mid-section of the game, which makes it feel as they stopped caring about the slums of Midgar, which is a large portion of the game. The atmosphere in Sector 7 and 5 slums were also lacking in comparison to the former and latter parts of the game, which is a shame considering the game was cut into 3 pieces just so they can focus on having an expansive Midgar.
So, what's next for you?
A little bit of bodyguard work.
Right.
This pump's sole purpose is to drain the planet dry. While you sleep, while you eat, while you shit, it's here sucking up Mako.
Moving on to sound. Starting with the soundtrack, I can easily say that the remake soundtrack is one of the best soundtracks I've ever heard. The new orchestrations were goosebump inducing, and listening to the iconic intro brought a tear to my eye. The new take on a classic Nobu Uematsu soundtrack is quite literally epic. Composed by the composers of Final Fantasy 7, 10, and 13, this soundtrack just screams epicness. The new arrangements of classics like Tifa and Aerith themes are just breathtaking. Each theme also has a couple of new arrangements, whether it's jazz, bossa nova, rock, or techno. It really feels like an insane amount of effort was put in for this soundtrack. The boss music was also top tier, as most bosses have insanely long music, and I never noticed any of them looping. This just shows the amount of musical attention given to these fights. There was even a fight where the beat changed and I was like, oh my god, this is really happening, and I was genuinely experiencing fear. The voice acting was also phenomenal. Everyone sounded perfect, and the voice acting performance was out of this world. The surround sound implementation was also solid, as it felt like a movie in more than a couple of cutscenes, as the quality of the surround was truly a marvel. Overall, the sound aspect of the game was the best part in my opinion, as I'm already waiting for the vinyl track to release. The last time I got this excited for a game's sound design was Nier Automata, and I won't be surprised if this has the best soundtrack this year. Heading on to gameplay, and I feel it's another mixed bag. Starting off with combat. Being directed by Tetsuya Nomura, I expected the combat to flow similarly to Kingdom Hearts, and for the most part, it did. The combat system is good. The materia system makes a return, making combat versatile and fun to experiment with, while also adding weapon proficiency, which basically gives you the ability to permanently learn a weapon skill, just like in Final Fantasy IX, which basically adds even more layering to the combat. Each character also has their own unique combat style. However, I feel like the ranged combat is a bit stale compared to the melee characters, as it feels too detached and slow. The game also brings back the active time battle system, the ATB, into the real-time action combat by having it charge slowly with time and by attacking, limiting your skills and ability usage depending on your ATB meter. This is implemented quite smoothly into the flow of battle. Each character also has a normal attack, or you can press triangle to use your special ability. For example, triangle switches Cloud from a normal attack mode to a Punisher mode, which removes your ability to block ranged attack. However, your melee block is now turned into a counter attack, and you dish out punishing amount of damage. Enemies also have a pressure meter. If filled, the enemy will enter their stagger state, allowing you to inflict bonus damage that you can easily turn the tides of battle. This system is just like Final Fantasy 13, except better implemented. Some issues I faced regarding combat is that while you dish out a good amount of damage on the character you control, the AI characters don't really feel like they're doing anything useful. They're not utilizing their triangle ability, nor are they filling up their ATB bar fast enough, making them annoying to deal with, especially if you create a dedicated healer, as normally that character wouldn't have enough ATB to heal you anyways. Plus, the AI controlled characters always find a way to die on me for some reason, which is frustrating, as you must switch to that character, heal him up, and then switch back. For some reason, I feel like the concept of summons don't mesh well in real-time combat, as when you summon a deity, it just attacks normally until you issue a command to it, which uses up the ATB bar. While these things are mild frustrations, by far the most annoying thing that absolutely ruins this combat system is the camera. This game probably has the worst camera I've seen in an action RPG. For some reason, whenever you lock onto a target, the camera moves in a way that always has that target off screen. Maybe it's the camera trying to be cinematic or something, but it fails in every single way. Even when going one-on-one against the monster, the camera still fails to show the monster if you move in any way, shape or form. The camera was by far the most frustrating part of the entire game, and it borderline makes this game unplayable. Outside of combat, the game consists of linear levels with 3 open world sections. These sections are spread across neatly throughout the game, and purely serves as a place to do some side quests. While the pacing of the game is quite good, I felt like the open world sections were an afterthought, as they slowed down the game to a crawl. The side quests are nothing more than fetch quests and killing quests, and they reward you with little to no story context. And while they're not many, and I completed every single side quest the game has to offer, I still felt like they were simply not worth the time invested in. Combat challenges also exist, and they provide you with summoning materia, which is worth investing in. Other than that, this is probably the first game I've played in which I enjoyed the linear sections more than the open world sections. Finally, the story, and where to begin. While this is not a faithful recreation of the original game, it mostly hits on the same plot points. The pacing was great, and I really enjoyed watching iconic moments in 2020 graphics. I enjoyed most of the new additions to the story as they were merely fleshing out characters, making each of them carry a bit more weight, especially Avalanche members. The writing itself was phenomenal. I really enjoyed the added depth to the characters as I was smiling at the jokes they're saying and some awkward situations they were put in. It basically covers the first third of the iconic story, from the bombing sector all the way to the beginning of the second disc on the PlayStation 1. I can't talk story without mentioning the controversial ending, and while I don't want to spoil anything regarding the ending, I'll just say that I'm excited to see where the plot takes us in part 2, and Tetsuya Nomura should probably not mess with the story from now on. Overall, I really loved the cinematic presentation of the story, and if it wasn't for this, I would probably not play this game. It's a classic that deserves every bit of praise it's getting. Overall, I feel like Final Fantasy VII Remake is worth a try, for fans and newcomers alike. While it has some flaws in regards to the gameplay, and I would have preferred turn-based combat, Persona and Dragon Quest kind of proves that there's still a market for that timeless style of game. However, it did feel like the game was a bit rushed. Mainly because of the low quality textures, splitting the game into 3 parts because they wanted to showcase Midgar in its entirety, then only providing 2 main hubs. The poorly implemented camera is also an indication of a rushed development. I can't see how they thought that was a good idea. Overall, it's a good game, but it does not live to the original in any way. Even with the CGI, I feel like the old game still beats it in terms of quality, as it may not have the graphics, but it did have the atmosphere and better backgrounds in some places. I'm genuinely excited to play part 2 and 3 on PC because let's be honest, it's probably the best way to experience this gorgeous cinematics the game is aiming for. Overall, I feel like Final Fantasy VII Remake is a solid 8 out of 10. It's not average and it's not great, and to be honest, if it wasn't for that insane soundtrack and ending, I would probably have given this a 7, as graphics alone doesn't do it for me personally. If you like the video, please leave a like, comment, subscribe, do all that good stuff. Share the video if you want to. And thank you for watching. I really appreciate you making it this far. Thank you and goodbye.